SCOTUS could end both same-sex marriage and the Voting Rights Act. Unbelievable, but believe it. Put it up full mass. How is this happening? Will the Supreme Court overturn same-sex marriage? SCOTUS is actually hearing the first challenge since 2015. This challenge of the 2015 decision comes from Kim Davis. If you remember, former Kentucky county clerk, this was one of the most popular and famous cases of outright defiance of an elected official. So she was the county clerk who was jailed, or public official. She was jailed in 2015 after being held in contempt for refusing to issue marriage license to same-sex couples. Davis, who refused to file the marriage license due to her religious belief, is appealing a damages verdict against her, a $100,000 jury verdict for emotional damages, plus a $260,000 price for attorney fees. If you remember this mugshot, now Kim Davis has taken the case to the U.S. Supreme Court on the grounds that the case was wrongly decided, the 2015 case was wrongly decided and infringes on her First Amendment rights. This is not the first time Davis has attempted to overturn the damages against her. In 2019, she also petitioned the Supreme Court to dismiss the lawsuit, but the court declined to hear the case. They don't have to hear cases they choose not to hear. Most recently, in 2025, a panel of judges from the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals also rejected her claims. Now, with the U.S. Supreme Court, they typically will cite either A, manpower. They don't have enough judges to go through every case. B, precedent, has to be of a federal concern or influencing a federal dynamic. But there's C, which is they just don't want to deal with it. But they get to choose which cases they take and what cases they do not. No other court gets to do that. So here's a reminder. 2015 ruling, you remember, stated this: same-sex couples must be allowed to marry and that all states must recognize those marriages. At that time, Davis's court battle was a direct challenge to the ruling, but the ruling held. Now, the way many of us saw this wasn't complex. This wasn't simply about a person making a personal decision. This was about a public servant making a personal decision, even though they work on behalf of the public good. They are there as advocates for the public trust. And because of that, they are required to administer the law effectively, efficiently, and fairly. They don't get to say what the law is. That's not the job of the clerk. The job of the clerk is to uphold the oath, which is the state constitution. That state constitution abides by the statutory framework of the U.S. Constitution, federal government, and the U.S. Supreme Court. And by that proxy, she, as an employee of that public trust, is a representative of the people, not of her personal belief. If she was a representative of her personal belief, why be a public servant? You need to be a personal servant if you're going to make decisions based on your personal belief system. Now, the Liberty Counsel, the conservative group representing Davis, is asking the Supreme Court to overturn not only the Sixth Court decision, but also the Supreme Court's initial ruling in 2015. Matt Staver, Liberty Counsel's founder and chair, stated the U.S. Supreme Court should overturn the wrongly decided case. This was an opinion because it threatens the religious liberty of all Americans who believe that marriage is a sacred union between one man and one woman. That's not actually how the case was decided. I want you to look at it this way, okay? And this is for anyone who may agree or disagree with same-sex marriage. let's get out of the context of religion for a moment. Because if we're saying this in the context of religion, there's no separation of church and state. So we know there is. If there's a separation of church and state, what does marriage become? Marriage is a contractual agreement. It's a contract. It's a contract. Some would call it a covenant, but it's a contract. The reason it's a contract is because when somebody violates the principles of the contract, guess where they take them? It's called to court. Why take them to court? Because it's a contract. And the court has jurisdiction over contracts. So a contract between two individuals, they have autonomy to make this contract, and they do so. For the church or for the religious expression of your doctrinal belief to play a role in that contract, why can't that doctrinal belief play a role in the contract you make between you and your plumber or you and the person that may do lawn care? Why is that? Well, because we don't do that with contracts in the United States of America. That's why. There's more. There is precedent. So let's talk about precedent for it to be overturned. The Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Shocker to the world, except for people that kept telling them they were going to do it, like myself and others. That happened in 2022. Ending federal protection for abortion rights after nearly 50 years. In his concurring opinion of the 2022 decision, that was Dobbs v. Jackson, which overturned Roe, Justice Clarence Thomas stated that the court should reconsider Obergefell and other cases. And we said that based on his opinion. To the rights based on Constitution and due process. Clarence Thomas laid the legal frame for this current court case. He said it. He said it in black and white. We read it. He gave you an idea of what was coming. He gave the Democrats a clear view of what was next. I think it was a warning that many Democrats decided to ignore. So now, should it be overturned? So 32 states, you got 32 states. They have laws in the books that would ban same-sex marriage, all right? Though thanks to the 2022 federal law, they will still have to recognize unions that were already legally formed. So SCOTUS prepares to end voting rights as we know it as well. So the Supreme Court last week announced that it wants to reconsider one of the core assumptions behind the Voting Rights Act. Whether it's even constitutional to intentionally draw congressional districts where Black or Latino voters make up the majority. So understand what their argument is now. The argument is basically racism doesn't exist without saying racism doesn't exist. Is it necessary to draw districts that have equal representation of particular groups that may have been historically disenfranchised because of the powers that be? The answer is yes, if you're looking for a progressive, fair nation. They're arguing possibly that by doing so, by trying to correct the wrong, the inequity, the immoral behavior of white male politicians primarily, in order to correct that we engage in racism by correcting the racism that existed or attempting to. That is the argument. The justices requested the briefing in a Louisiana redistricting case, asking if the creation of a second majority Black district meant to comply with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which was significantly gutted, which turned 60 this week, might violate the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. It's a quiet but seismic signal. The court isn't just skeptical of the Voting Rights Act power. It also is asking whether the law's foundational remedy, majority to minority district, is itself illegal. Wow. I said something like this would happen in an op-ed that I wrote for rolling out basically the framework provided by the U.S. Supreme Court to get rid of diversity equity and inclusion or affirmative action. None of these are policies. These are simple, um, these are frames to allow a better interpretation of not only a person or a group of people, but a minority group, a community, Latino, Black, male, female, LGBTQ, etc. It's to allow for better representation all across the board. Without it, what happens? Well, you go back to what you had before. You go back to a very white male dominated regime where the individuals who are paying into the system have zero voice and they feel as if they have no other choice but to protest, boycott, withdraw economically. It becomes a never ending empire of fight, fight, and fight, rather than victories, progress, and reconciliation. There's no room for reconciliation when you're not giving an iota of power. But when you do have power, you have somebody in the room willing to fight for you, at least communities believe there's a fighting chance. You take that away, people stop seeing light at the end of the tunnel. And that's the place you don't want to go. All right, we'll bring you updates as they come.